Welcome to the Wild Crone Wisdom podcast with your host Vinuta Mohan. In this episode, we are diving deep into a topic that's often misunderstood and yet so crucial to explore: understanding disability through the lens of culture, family, and society. Our guest today is someone who brings both professional expertise and personal insight into this conversation. Let me take a few minutes to introduce our guest, Dr. Sudha Krishnan. Sudha Krishnan has taught students with extensive support needs in middle school for 13 years, for 18 years. For the past 10 years, she has been teaching courses in the Education Specialist Credential and Master's Degree programs at San Jose State University. Her interest in special education was sparked by her experiences with children with disabilities during her early years in India and further cultivated when her son was diagnosed with autism. Her research interests are focused on challenging and empowering education for students with the most extensive support needs. She is also examining the teacher and parent perceptions of ability in students with extensive support needs. Her current research is on how South Asian families navigate the stigma around disability within their communities. Welcome, Sudha.
Hello, I'm so glad to be here.
To start with, how would you personally define disability?
Yes, and that is a difficult question to answer because there are many definitions and perspectives on disability, depending on what model of disability you choose to come from. So, the way we traditionally define disability is looking at the impairment of the person and saying that there is something intrinsically wrong or a defect in the person. This is called the deficit model of disability. So, when you look at a person and say, "Oh, they have these deficiencies and they are, different from the normal or the typically developing children or adults in this way," that is the deficit model of disability. The other way to look at disability is the social model of disability, to get away from the intrinsic deficit of the individual and see how the society fails to provide access to the individual. And I'll give you an example. For example, if you are standing in front of a long flight of stairs, and there is something that you want to access at the top of the stairs. And if you do not have legs that can climb stairs for whatever reason, if you're standing down at the bottom of the stairs, you are disabled because you cannot access the whatever you want at the top of the stairs. But if you're provided with a wheelchair and there is a ramp, then you're no longer disabled because you have full access to whatever others can access at the top of the flight of stairs.
Yeah.
Now, this is a physical example. So you see how it is not the lack of limbs that can carry you up the stairs that makes for disability, but the lack of provision of a ramp or an alternative device that can help you navigate the flight of stairs, that is the real cause for disability. So once we move away from the intrinsic model of disability to see how society does not provide access to services. And I gave you a physical example, but this can be extended to the intellectual spaces, not necessarily physical spaces, social spaces, communicative spaces. If we all communicate using a certain way, like speech, and then the people who are not able to speak will see themselves as, and we see them as disabled. But if we can provide alternative ways for communication, then everybody has access to that space too. And similarly for, social spaces and, all kinds of spaces. So I think, where the disability movement is moving ahead is to take away the meaning of disability as being an intrinsically deficit model to being more of a social construct. And in that sense, we can say that we can define disability in terms of support that society provides to the individual. And that is why, students who are initially called severely disabled are today called students with the most extensive support needs. That means we are moving away from the intrinsic deficiencies of the individual, or the perceived deficiencies of the individual, to what society can do to support them.
So, in other words, what you're saying is that the stories and the narratives we hold about our, how we perceive disability, and the cultural lens, and that we use to, look at how, how we hold disability, it affects, the kind of support that we give people who are, struggling with disability.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
think our cultural perception of disability is
Yeah.
most important in our
Right.
definition of, like,
Right.
you and I grew up in India,
Yeah.
right? What was
Yeah.
our exposure to the disabled people?
Mm.
For example, we would come out of a temple and we would see disabled people sitting outside the temple begging for alms, right?
Yeah.
Or so we would look at them with this charity model of,
Yeah.
if I can use a Tamil phrase which says "Ayyo Pavam," that is, oh
Mm.
my, how
Mm.
pitiful. So the
Yes.
attitude towards disability was one of pity and one
Yes.
of misfortune, and
Yeah.
that defines the way we react to people with disability, and
Yeah.
the way we perceive how we define disability.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We come
It's a
from a
perfect.
model. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue to my first topic that I want to explore with you. So, the cultural anthropologist and neuropsychologist, Dr. Mario Martinez, he talks extensively about how our mind and bodies are genetically impacted by cultural conditioning, which affects our perceptions, our beliefs, and then therefore our behaviors. So, given that research context, how does the Indian socio-cultural conditioning influence the perception of disability? That's my first topic. For example, certain things come to mind when you think about the Indian culture, the karma theory, the influence of astrology, the religious doctrines and superstition, and so on. So I really want to unpack this one by one. So my first question is, how do beliefs about karma and fate, the fatalistic attitudes, affect the acceptance of a child's disability within the Indian family?
So in my this is these are the findings of my research that I have done over the last 2 years, where I
Yeah.
interviewed a group of South Asian parents,
Mm-hmm.
both
Mm-hmm.
mothers and fathers. There
Mm-hmm.
were 13 of them, and I discovered, and I mean, here is where there is a convergence of our interests,
Yeah.
because you talk so much about the cultural stories that are imprinted in our mind and the patterns
Yeah.
that we sometimes subconsciously or unconsciously are always acting out. And
Mm.
what I discovered was this amazing thing that, we are not aware of the patterns, we are not aware of how culture and our background influence our perception of disability. And my interest is disability. And
Mm-hmm.
somehow I think both our interests have converged in this, because I think our cultural patterns actually make for and later on we'll talk more about that, feelings of inadequacy and shame
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
guilt
Mm-hmm.
that goes with the whole social idea of disability in South Asian culture. So there were four big themes that arose from my research in related to stigma,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how we perceive disability. First of all, disability is perceived as an exceptionality. That is, it is not in
Mm.
the spectrum of normal human behavior.
Yeah.
It is outside, it is exceptional. Or
Mm-hmm.
some families had never heard of that. This has never
Mm.
happened in our families. This,
Mm.
we have never seen people with disability, because they are often hid behind
Yeah.
doors. And so there is the big idea of exceptionality. The second theme was disability is a misfortune. Oh my
Mm-hmm.
God, that is so unlucky. There is, maybe there's a curse in the family.
Right.
Maybe there is something wrong with the family. Do you have to go and check if,
Mm-hmm.
this is a big loss for you? How sorry I am to hear this. And so seeing it as suffering, as misfortune. Thirdly, there is this big idea in the South Asian culture that something was wrong with the mother. There's a maternal
Mm-hmm.
failure. And
Mm-hmm.
this was beautifully brought to my notice by one of the individuals I interviewed, where she points to even our ancient epic Mahabharata saying that the condition of the child is dependent upon the state of the mother. Especially, there is this, how in the Mahabharata, how Dhritarashtra, the king, is born blind because the mother closed her eyes during intercourse. And
Mm,
the second child is born pale, or the Pandu is born pale because the mother was terrified and turned pale during intercourse. So somehow the disability of a child or the exceptionality of a child is linked to something the mother did. And so
mhm.
the big looming burden of maternal failure and how does that impact, mothers in our culture who are raising individuals with disabilities. And the third, the last one was disability as a punishment for past actions. And this is
Mm,
something that is, again, when you talk about, and I think we are going to go over each of these in
yeah.
detail. So we are talking about karma and how the somehow disability is seen, it is an extension of the misfortune of, so it is something that I did in my past life. Is
Mm,
a sin that I or my family or the disabled child committed in their past life, and that is why we are enduring this.
right.
So all these are, these were the four main themes of stigma in my research.
Yeah, I do know that we have, especially in our culture, this complete misperception of karma as some sort of a reward punishment mechanism rather than as a scientific choice consequence, model. So, but we digress. So, um, and how about religious beliefs? So let's say, some of us, whenever we suffer, we may turn towards religion, not necessarily spirituality, but religion. So what kind of religious beliefs are then being held, or how do they provide comfort, or do they create further challenges for these parents with, children of disability?
So the religious beliefs that we hold are based on what? Maybe some of them are superstitions,
Hmm.
so it would relate to maternal blame. So
Right.
did the mother go out during a solar eclipse? Did you
Mm,
expose yourself, to some kind of radiation that is either imaginary or, or real?
mhm.
So finding blame with the mother for something they did outside of normal religious practices.
Mhm.
Then you might have ideas of astrology, like you said, coming in
Yeah.
into the belief that is somehow that if you are very strongly a believer in astrology, so many of the parents that I talked to said either they or their parents or extended family tried to go back to astrologers to see what was wrong with the family stars or the individual stars. And then they said that, oh, it is a temporary phenomenon. And once the stars
Mm,
change, your
mm,
child is going to be okay. So that kind of belief that disability is not permanent, it is impermanent, is a
mm.
dangerous belief because
Yes.
then you are not going to do as much as you can
Yeah.
to advocate for your child. If it is a temporary phenomenon, who is going to invest the time fighting for their or advocating for their child's rights in kindergarten when an
Right.
astrologer tells you and you believe that in
Yeah.
by the third grade they are going to be fine? And that is
Mm,
exactly what one parent said, that,
mm.
oh, they said it was going to be temporary, and by in 4 years, my child will be talking like everybody else, and so why would I invest time in doing therapy and advocating for my child? And
Mm,
similarly with other religious beliefs that visiting certain temples will cure your
yeah.
child, and so you take extensive time out of your child's caregiving to visit all the temples or do pilgrimages, and you stay in the belief that somehow that is going to affect the growth of your child instead of advocating for them in the school setting. So
Yeah.
by placing priority over religion and by placing priority over astrology, what it really does is affect. I mean, it's all good. I mean, people have different beliefs,
Yeah.
and it is all good. But then when it affects the development of the child or your fight for advocacy for the child, that is where I think we need to question how much of time we spend doing all that.
Yeah.
It also, I think, religion and superstition also affect the way that parents deal with their child. Because if you believe that somehow this is a misfortune, or this is something that it comes with a feeling of shame, then we tend to be more exclusive. So we try to hide our shame. We don't want to share it with
Mm,
everybody. And I
mm,
think in that way, religion has got a role to play in how South Asian parents
mm.
react in the community with their child.
Yeah, yeah. You have heard me talk this concept of spiritual bypassing, which is very, very common in our cultures. And the concept of spiritual bypassing is how we use religion or spirituality to avoid dealing with the real issue. So going on pilgrimages, or dealing with going to the astrologers, or doing what they say in Tamil pariharams, like appeasing the gods with all kinds of bribes, right? And so all of that take us away from the real issue, which is advocating, for the child. And also there is some magical thinking as well, so. And also I just also want to point out one other thing in our religious doctrines. For instance, the where the fatalistic kind of beliefs come in, where in the Gita, where it says, accept, right, the concept of acceptance, and that there is a difference between acceptance and resignation. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that, like, when people turn to these religious doctrines.
Yeah, so a lot of the parents did say that they had a spiritual turn in their life. So
Mm,
that was a significant response to disability, in the sense
mm,
that where even formerly they may not have had interest in religion, now they were turning towards religion. And how did that affect their mindset? Their mindset was, oh, this was meant to happen. This is something that I have to live with. And I have to accept. In fact, not in my research, but anecdotally, one of the parents I talked to, and I think that is a good metaphor for this thing, that I am serving a life sentence. And
mm,
I got to finish that.
yeah,
And thinking of that as resignation, of acceptance of fate, that there is nothing I can do about it, there is nothing I can advocate, I cannot be an agent of change in the life of my child or my destiny, and this is given, and I just have to suffer and bear the consequences. So this kind of an attitude of fatalism, call it what you will, resignation, acceptance of the fate, seemed to loom large over in the conversations that I had with parents, that there is
yeah,
nothing we can do about this. And I
yeah,
think I may be wrong, but then I did sense that it was coming from the religious beliefs of the
yeah.
individual,
Right, right. Or their interpretation
or the
of it.
interpretation of the
Yeah,
religious beliefs.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I know you have weaved the advocacy theme, through the entire conversation on this topic. But I still want to ask this question. So, all of these beliefs and all of these cultural perceptions, how does that impact them, seeking advocacy for their children, especially in the early years of the diagnosis? And does that have any, serious consequences later on, or could the certain things have been done earlier on, to advocate for the child, and give the child the resources that the child would have needed at those times?
So traditionally, in our in special education, we talk about the importance of early intervention.
Yeah,
We say that if the child is diagnosed early, then the introduction of different kinds of interventions at that age is very important. Now, if a family is suffering from a shock of initial diagnosis, the trauma of initial diagnosis, and you have people in the family, raising their eyebrows at this and causing shame and causing guilt, and the mother is unsettled because she feels guilt and being blamed. I see that emotional trauma will affect the way they seek services.
mm-hmm.
They will not be as forthcoming in
Mm,
talking about their child with a disability and going forth and getting help from the different sources.
mm,
There is, and then at that stage, the family does need a lot of community, social, and family support. And there is also this problem with our South Asian community where there is this generational divide too, where a lot of the people who have come to the United States are from a generation where they are maybe first generation in the workforce, first generation
Mm.
women in the workforce. The mothers have been educated, and we are probably, and you can relate to this, that our parents probably, the mothers and the grandmothers stayed home
Yeah.
while our generation went out to work. And
Right.
so being the first generation workforce parents, that also causes problems in family relationships. And so
Hmm.
instead of seeking the support of their family, there might be a fractured family system where
Yeah.
you would tend to distance your family
Hmm.
from it, so that nobody gossips about your child, or
Yeah.
nobody talks. So instead of seeking the extended family support that South Asians are usually rely on, this is not available to the families who are experiencing disability with their children.
Hmm.
So, in many ways, that initial diagnosis and the trauma is important, and when we are aware of it, I think we can make sure that the people who are diagnosed in the future do not go through the same
Right.
problems that we went through.
Yeah, yeah, which is why we are doing this
Yes.
podcast,
Yeah.
to educate more of us. So that's a perfect segue to my next topic. Moving into the family, and the family system, and the impact. And so, in my work, we look at family as being made up of different subsystems. So in a family system, there is a couple's subsystem, and then there's a sibling subsystem, and then there is the extended family, grandparents, and other extended family subsystems. So, um, what I would like to ask is, you talked a little bit about women and the shame, and the first generation of women working and coming into the workforce, and so on and so forth. And so, let's talk about the impact of when a child is first diagnosed with a disability. What is the impact on the couple and their marriage? And especially, how does the mother take it versus the father? Are there any differences? And in terms of how they hold it and how they get then involved in the advocacy and the caregiving aspects.
Yeah. So, as far as the couples are concerned, in my research, there were some instances of couple discord.
Hmm.
Because of either the just the pressures of raising a child with disability, because it is not easy, and
Hmm.
it requires a lot of time and effort, and it takes away from many of the things that couples would normally do to keep their marriage strong. And so there were a couple of instances where there was discord between the couples, which ended in divorce or separation. And that was evident that there was some kind of maybe a placing of blame on each other, maybe moving away from each other, maybe not finding enough time to spend together. Those were some of the things that came up. Um, and definitely there was this pressure of caregiving on the female parent or the mother, because the mother felt responsible for nurturing the child. And very often, in all the cases, the mother was working, and then took off from work to stay home with the child, and kind of in her mind sacrificed her career. And the very fact that that is in the mind said that, oh, I have given up all of this to take care of the child, and wanting to prove to the world that I am kind of the best mother for this child, and going over and above and beyond the requirements
Mm.
for the child's therapy, making sure that the child is exposed to every kind of therapy, making sure that they are doing everything, whether it is medically, whether it is nutritionally, whether it is socially, whether it is, learning music, doing this therapy, that therapy, taking their child from pillar to post to cure their child or to treat their child, and so to speak. that was a very common theme, that, oh, I
Yeah.
left my career in order to take
Yeah.
care of my child.
Yeah. And it's some sort of overcompensation,
Yes.
in terms of both, like, I'm making up, okay, my child has a disability, I'm like overcompensating by giving them every ounce of every resource possible. And also, you're not working anymore, so you're kind of like channeling all of that energy through your child and trying to advocate for your child, I'm guessing. So um I've also seen, and where, especially when we were talking about women working, and some of them want to keep working, and I've seen it, happen, them approaching that in a couple of ways. One is, and this is very common in our culture, where they kind of ship off the child with the grandparents to India, because then the grandparents, even when the child doesn't have a disability, this happens. And through my own work, I know the kind of attachment trauma that lives in a child, and never ever advocate that for anyone. So that could happen, or families from India, grandparents, could come over and help, the woman who, let's say, wants to continue, her career, and doesn't really sacrifice that way, but has now this, extended family now sitting, in their household. So can you speak to that, like, in these both scenarios, how that affects the child? And
So, as far as my research was concerned, many of the people felt that their immediate extended family, that is, the grandparents, were a good source of support, in the sense that although they spoke of maternal blame, and they spoke of astrology and religion and superstition, they said in the end, the family did come to help their child. And they were a big help in the early years, where they stayed with the family and helped. And they said, but it came with all the pressures of being in a joint family. That was one of the trade-offs that they made. And they said, but they welcomed the help, and that their parents were very supportive, and stuff like that. It was the other extended family, that is the aunts and the uncles
mm,
and everybody, who they said would gossip and
mm,
make eyes, or express concern over the condition of their child, or make inquiries that were not appropriate for their child. And so I saw, like, the family was fractured, not perhaps in the immediate extended family, not the parental generation, but the extended family of the aunts and the uncles, and the greater family of friends that they may have had in India and over here, where they felt that they had to disconnect. And in fact, one participant was very clear when she said that, I had to cut off relationships with some of the extended family members, because I could not bear to hear what they were saying. And I
mm,
said, stop it, enough. And if
mm,
they made negative comments, I would never speak to them again. And
mm,
I just felt that, so that is how the system of isolation works, where you start cutting off. You cannot bear this kind of judgmental reactions, and then you start cutting off your extended family and your other supports in the community. And that is what isolates you. So not only does it fracture the family, but it also creates an isolation, where maybe you are there with your immediate parents taking care of your child, and the rest of the family does not should not know what is happening
yeah.
to you and your
Yeah,
family.
yeah, and I do want to come back to that in a minute. But before that, I have a couple of other things. So, um, perhaps this did not come up in your research, but as a parent, can you talk about this, the other way of dealing with it, like by sending the child off to India, because they probably have more resources there in terms of physical resources, not in terms of the what the child needs. As a parent, can you talk to that, and how, that, just
So
about that? Yeah.
So when you are talking about a child with disability, of course, every family will have their own priorities and their
Yeah.
own ways of doing things. And I think we cannot judge whether one is better than the other. If they continue to live in this country with a child with a disability, of course, there are many supports available, community supports, social supports provided by the state, by the regional center agencies, so you can, and if, but you have to have that faith that
Yeah.
that your child is going to be safe. And that was something that came up in my research where so one parent said, I was worried for the safety. I have a daughter. I was worried for the safety of my child. And so I would prefer not to take services from the state or from the community or even advocate for inclusion because I do not know who was taking care of my child. I would rather that my child be in a safe classroom, even if it is a segregated space, if there were fewer people who I could trust and I could check on them. That would be a safe spot. So the idea of sending the child to India becomes, a matter of priority where you think, okay, they may have more supports and they may be able to take care of them better. And in my recent journeys to India, when I saw the kind of support that they were getting, and yes, there is a lot of physical support. There is the family who can take care. There are people you can hire to take care of the physical needs of the child. But then what happens when the child grows up? And when the
Mm,
child is no longer being able to be cared by their immediate family. And then
mm,
I think there are fewer options in India for the child to, be safe in in a group home or where there's no family supervision.
right.
So I find that there are some gaps in the Indian society as far as school availability, educational availability for the children with disability are concerned, especially for those with extensive support needs. And I think but it's a personal choice whether
Yeah.
you want to avail of the services here or avail of the services in India.
Yeah, yeah. My 2 cents on that as a trauma specialist, and especially someone who specializes in relational trauma, the trauma that happens in your close, intimate relationships, there is the impact of the child being away from the parent
Mhm,
and the attachment wounds from
mhm.
that. So I just want to mention that. So, okay, moving on to another aspect of the family subsystem. How about the impact on the siblings, especially the siblings who may, be in so-called regular ed?
Yes. So one is my personal experience. I had two boys, and one of them had autism. My second boy grew up in a family where his brother was autistic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I personally saw the way that it affected him, in the sense that I would see that every time we would have his friends over, either in the beginning we had to take my other son out of the place, so that means one parent would be missing because they would have taken the child to maybe a ride in the van or
Yeah,
somewhere outside
yeah.
until this party was over. Or if all of us were together, we had to put up with my younger son disrupting his play or his activity with his friends. And so he grew up in that kind of an environment where there was always tension along with inviting his friends over. And in my research, I found that many people echoed the same things, that yes, we
Mm,
focused a lot on this child, and so it took away from what we could have done with the sibling, or the sibling had to learn to cope and negotiate the differences in the family environment because of our child with disability. And that definitely affected the development of social relations in the other sibling. And or they said the siblings social community was most important, and they ignored the social activities of the individual with disability. So they spoke of
mm,
both
Yeah.
these events.
Mhm.
So there is a lot more research that needs to be done to talk about
Mhm.
how siblings are affected by
Right.
a child with disability in their family. Either some of them have taken the path of advocacy for their siblings, and some of them have actually ignored the
Yeah.
disability completely. And so, what forms it takes and what ways it takes depends on each individual's personality and their experiences in such a developing family setting.
Yeah, yeah. In my own work with clients, I have seen that there is this developing field of research called sibling trauma, and I've seen some of my clients who grew up with a sibling with disability, whether it's severe mental disability or physical disability, and depending on how that family held that, it really impacted them sometimes in uh, creating deep trauma for them, vicarious trauma. So, yeah, it is. I think it's definitely an area of further research. So now I want to, shift to a different topic about community and community support, which, as you know, one of my primary focus in my work is around healing this wound of loneliness. That loneliness, me like just like Vivek Murthy, very much I believe that loneliness is a huge epidemic in the world, and that the nuclear family system is the biggest social experiment failure. And so one of the things that I constantly talk to my clients is that it does take a village to do life, and especially to raise children. So in that context, earlier on, you touched a little bit upon one of your research participants who said that she had to isolate herself, from extended family, um, and just to protect herself, because of all the ignorance and the shame and the which can then lead to severe disconnection. So, um, can you kind of elaborate further on that and saying how does community or lack thereof affect or impact a family dealing with a child with, severe needs special needs?
Course. Because that was the main purpose. That was my, if you will, the foreshadowing inquiry question into my research. That is
Mm-hmm.
how do parents, South Asian parents, see disability from the point of view of inclusion or, advocacy for
Yeah.
inclusive settings. And what I, of course, found was beyond inclusive settings in educational placements, though I was just looking for why they prefer segregated placements over inclusion in many cases. And yes, there were reasons for that, which were not always cultural, but some of it was cultural. Some of it was based on, as I said, priority of safety over academics,
Yeah.
and other things. But the huge response to this stigma of disability was to exclude themselves from
Mm-hmm.
family, was to exclude themselves from friends, was to exclude
Mm-hmm.
themselves from, the mainstream community.
Yeah.
Given that most of the people I interviewed were immigrants,
Mm-hmm.
immigrants have a different way of finding support, right?
Mm-hmm.
They look
Mm-hmm.
for support within their community
Right.
first.
Right.
And they look for their friends. They look for friends who would bring them support. They look for family, extended family. They mix with that. And that is the way we assimilate slowly into the general community. As we move on to the workforce, we broaden our, friends and community members, and then we get more and more exposed to other parts of the community. However, as soon as they came in, most of the parents that I spoke to had children at a very, very initial transit time when they had just come into this country as maybe students, when they had gotten married, and before they could assimilate into the general community, they had their child with disability, and they already started isolating themselves. However,
Mm-hmm.
as you say, we are wired for connection,
Right.
right? Human
Right.
beings, and you have often said that we are
Yeah.
human beings are wired for connection. So where
Yeah.
did they find this connection then? They
Mm-hmm.
found it in other parents with children with
Mm-hmm.
disabilities. So you find South Asian parents leaning towards organizations that were made only for parents with children with disabilities. And they found comfort in that
Mm-hmm.
community because nobody judged their children. They
Right.
found comfort in the friendship over there because the concerns were the same. And they
Yeah.
felt very out of place in, places where the general community met because parents would look at their child differently. And one of them said would make eyes at each other when their
Mm.
children did something or said something that may have been inappropriate. And also they felt left out of conversations where, and you will agree with me in this, that most South Asians are obsessed about their children's success and how
Yeah.
they're doing, and they compare
Yeah.
what they're doing in their schools. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the participants said, we as a community are not allowed to fail. We as a community are
Mm-hmm.
not allowed to have a mental disability. We are not allowed to be sick. We are not
Mm.
allowed to be gay. We are not allowed to do anything that is different from
Yeah.
the norm. We are the
Yeah.
model community. We have to succeed. And with that kind of a pressure, who would want to be a member of
Mm-hmm.
this
Yes.
community, right?
Yeah.
So they tend to isolate themselves. They tend to stick more with other parents with children with disability. And what does that do? That actually builds walls around the community, right? You
Yeah.
have so you're only talking to this set of parents. You're only being with this community, and you're making yourself into a smaller and smaller group
Yeah.
rather than broadening and assimilating into the general community. So I found that this kind of isolation actually may result in may have an effect on inclusive settings overall, because you're not exposing your child to the general community support and the general social settings that are there in our community. So,
Mm.
and I think you say it takes a village to grow a child, but then what kind of village,
What
right?
kind of?
So if
Yep.
you are choosing to exclude yourself and have a village of a community of disabled parents, that is a different experience. And I'm again,
Mm-hmm.
I would hate to judge, or I would hate to say that one experience is better than the other. But this is what I found, that they tended to exclude themselves, and
Mm-hmm.
people can put whatever implications for that, their own interpretation on what would happen to children who grew up in just that one community.
Mm-hmm.
So those were some of the things that our community does and there was another interesting example of a participant who said that why would I disclose my daughter's disability to the general public? And she looked at me and she said, you're a mother, you know that I have two daughters. If I talk about my daughter's disability to everybody, who will marry my second daughter?
Yeah.
And coming from a culture which talks about meeting of families,
Yeah.
as important for marriage rather than individuals, then
Yeah.
you start thinking about, yes, these are the reasons why they would not want to be part of the general community, because they
Yeah.
don't want to expose their children to the general community. They don't want their siblings to be affected by it. They don't want judgmental reactions and this kind of barriers to marriage and the future of their siblings are all important, and so they tend to exclude themselves from the mainstream community.
Yeah. Yeah. So, since this is the core of your research, um, what do you think we as a community need to do in order to provide and be a better source of resource for parents who are dealing with children with special needs?
So I go back to my first, how we define disability,
Right.
right?
Right.
When we think of disability as deficient, when we think of disability as exceptional, that is, it is beyond the pale of human experience. That is where the problem lies. And so the education that disability is a normal human experience. That is, some
Mm,
people experience the world
Mm,
having certain biological features, and there is biological diversity in human
mm,
beings,
mhm,
and disability is to be explained as biological diversity, as
mhm,
neurodivergence. People
mm,
see things differently, people hear things differently, people learn differently. And when you put it on that same spectrum of biological diversity, that we are all different in the way
mm.
we experience the world, and disability is just part of that. So then it becomes easier to accept
Yeah.
disability not as an exceptionality. Oh, I have never heard. And when I talked to the parents, and we concurred that for most of us growing up, disability was an exceptionality. It was not
Mm,
the norm. And we rarely saw disabled
right.
people in our families, which makes
Right.
me wonder, because the numbers are the same across the world, which makes
Mhm.
me wonder what happened to those disabled people. And,
Yeah.
raises maybe sinister thoughts in my mind as to how disabled were treated, or
Yeah.
maybe not given the right medical treatment, or allowed to
Yeah.
die, or
Yeah.
many different ideas came to my mind when
Mhm.
we said that we did not see, our families had never heard of disability.
Yeah.
We had
Mhm.
never seen disability in our family. So
Yeah.
what is going on then? So
Yeah.
the idea that disability is exceptional should be removed from our
Mhm.
thinking. The
Mhm.
disability is part of the normal human experience.
Mhm.
Then I do not, definitely, I will not venture out saying that our religious beliefs or anything has to be changed, because that is not, that is way beyond my expertise, and I would
Right.
never go as far as to question somebody's beliefs. But I would say that if those beliefs and those superstitions are affecting the advocacy for your child in the school setting or in the community setting, I would say take a look at it. Be aware of
Mhm.
what those superstitions are doing to you. Be aware of what the religious doctrine is doing to you and your child and your family. So I think it is important to become aware of how, like you mentioned initially, what cultural stories are being
Yeah.
printed into our mind, and who
Right.
are the people who are editing these stories. I know that you talk a
Yes.
lot about the cultural editors and the social
Yep.
editors. So who
Yeah.
are these editors in your life, and
Yes.
are they benefiting you, or
Yes.
are they creating a narrative that is destructive to your family? And so taking a step back as a community and looking at what we think is useful and what we think is not useful is important.
Mhm. Mhm. Excellent. And so now we come to the, my area of expertise, which is on, mental health. And I want to take a few minutes before we bring this podcast to an end to explore that aspect. So what all of these cultural editing, the cultural conditioning, the lack of community support, the shame, the fatalistic and magical thinking, and all of that, and isolation, and what impact it has on the mental health of the caregivers. So as before earlier in the podcast, you mentioned about a mother, say, probably had great dreams of having a successful career, then sacrificed everything, and then now it's exclusively sitting and managing resources for her child. And what happens to the elements of like the grief and the loss of a dream, and the isolation, the shame? What have you seen, how that impacts their mental health?
So I have to make a caveat over here that a lot of my opinions here are personal opinions and
Yep.
not a part, because I'm not a mental health
Right.
a specialist.
Right.
And just my personal experience and perhaps anecdotal experiences, and some experiences with parents. I know that every time during my research, when I spoke to the parents became intensely emotional.
Mm,
And this was the first research that I did where I barely spoke. And once my participants started talking, there was actually no stopping them because the words just flowed and flowed. In many
Mm-hmm.
occasions, tears just flowed and flowed as they remembered their initial diagnosis, they
Yeah.
remembered the trauma. In fact, one of them started to sob and said that I have never spoken to anyone about these feelings.
Yeah.
And I have to say that I shared a lot of their sorrow. And
Mm-hmm.
there was this kind of understanding and empathy in my mind that
Mm-hmm.
I have been through a lot of what you have been through.
Yeah.
And I think this kind of perception of disability and the trauma of initial diagnosis, the judgmental reactions, the way that our culture frames disability in our minds, and how what we go through when we first realize that our child is disabled is immensely destructive to the mental health.
Yeah.
It causes trauma. I think that in my personal opinion, again, I'm not a mental health specialist, and I'm only talking about the opinion that I may have after witnessing
Yeah.
the participants and my own life and other anecdotal experiences of the parents. In the South Asian culture, there's also a stigma about seeking therapy and
Yeah.
seeking relief to trauma, or working on oneself in order to acknowledge the pain that you're going through. There is this tremendous idea that you have to be a martyr, that you can overcome challenges, that you are resilient, that you are, it can also come from our immigrant status, that we are immigrants, we have to be grateful for this society, we are grateful to whatever is happening to us. It can come from the religious experience of acceptance and resignation, but there is a kind of denial of the trauma that we are going through, and the seeking of help. And I think that is something that we have to come to terms with, that it is okay to have trauma,
Yeah.
to try to find out the causes for trauma, which may be
Yeah.
within us, which may be without us.
Yeah.
And it could be the social factors, it could be the social pressures, it could be the pressures that we have put on ourselves. And there has to be some kind of reckoning in our community that it is okay to seek help, that
Yeah.
because you have a child with disability, you're going through a lot, and as parents you need to go and seek some family therapy to keep your families together, to keep your the maybe the extended families together, maybe to keep yourself as a whole person, so that you can care for your loved ones in a good way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I really think that the parents go through a lot of trauma, not only in the initial diagnosis, but also through the school setting, because
Mm-hmm.
the it is many of the parents did mention that every IEP meeting was a cause of stress in their life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Some of the parents said that there were like 6 or 7 people sitting around a table talking about their child. That was not a comfortable experience.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
when they are subject to so much stress year after year, when they see different phases of their child, and I think having therapy, putting recognizing the factors that cause these stress and doing something to alleviate that stress should be encouraged, not
Yeah.
discouraged in our community. And if
Yeah.
if you can be healthy, you can advocate for your child better, you can engage with your child better, and you can love
Yeah.
your child better.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
don't know how you think about this situation, but that is my
Yeah.
opinion.
Absolutely. And I think, and I will say a few words about that at the end, and we will do a part 2 and 3 of this very, very important topic on self-care, for the parents and all the different aspects of self-care, um, and also for teachers. And so absolutely. And in for example, one think that it can really help is to help the parents kind of discern what is their own trauma that they are projecting then onto their child, and what is the true needs and the advocacy needs of the child, because sometimes it can be our own dreams that we then superimpose on the child, and then set for example unrealistic IEP goals, that, so the child may have very, very basic needs that need to be met, but instead you're focusing on, oh, how do I get him into Stanford in their advanced calculus program, or something like that, because of your own projection of your dreams that probably are not going to be met, and all the grief and loss that comes from that. It really muddles our thinking, in terms of what the child truly needs versus our own unmet needs. So that's just a quick example, which I think we'll explore in part two of this podcast. Um, I do. I don't want to end this particular segment without actually talking a little bit about your own personal journey, and having been a witness to your journey. And as we have talked about these various topics, I can't help but observe that how you have done this journey, at least in my opinion, quite differently, in terms of how you um, brought your family into the mainstream community, how you never hid your child, how you went on to do your master's, your PhD, and you would also even go to Bollywood classes, and really you tried to live as normal a life as you could, and integrate your child into the community. And I'm wondering if you can actually speak to that a little bit personally, as a mother of an autistic child.
Yeah, my personal journey has been different, and part of the reason why I do research in this field of, especially cultural perceptions of disability, is because of what I experienced throughout my journey.
Yeah.
And so my research is based on a lot of the things that I think are important to bring out to our community and talk in our community. Because we don't talk about it.
Right.
I cannot say that I have been as successful as other parents in fighting for inclusive settings for my child as far as educational placements are concerned. My child was mostly in segregated classes throughout, and did not show the skills that they thought made him ready for inclusive settings. And so some of my research there is again to question what is the readiness that we expect from our children to take them to social settings. I think I was very fortunate to have you as a friend, and some other friends and your friends who accepted our family, for with all its flaws and with all its diversity, into the larger friendship community. And I got a lot of support from this community. And
Right.
part of my research is to say that and I never felt the need to go and seek organizations
Yeah.
or the friendship of only parents who had children with disabilities, because I felt my child was welcomed in
Yes.
whatever setting and in whatever form he chose to be. Because certainly, my son has many behaviors and is not an easy person to, accommodate in gatherings. But, it was just, he was accepted for the way he was.
Yeah.
And we had different opinions from different friends, some of them placing him high above as, having a religious experience of his own, and some of them just acknowledging that he was different and sometimes not so easy to live with.
Yeah.
And that is the human diversity that we talk about, that the acceptance that yes, people are different, but they are, and it's okay to be different, right?
Yeah.
So my personal journey, and because of that friendship community, and I thought, I most of the things that I did in social settings,
Yeah.
the Bollywood dancing or other things were done in social settings, right? And so I sought out experiences so that I would not be isolated, because I hated
Mm-hmm.
hiding and living in shame.
Mm-hmm.
And this was something that I wanted to do, to keep the health of our family together.
Yeah.
So it has been different, but I would say that when I look at some other parents, they have done probably a better job at advocating for their child in inclusive settings. I wish that sometimes I had done more for that. When I see some parents who have spent a lot of time educating their child individually, and I said, oh, maybe, I could have done a better job of, maybe he would have been in a different place if I had spent more time with him at home rather than me being at school. There are always second guesses how I would have lived my life, but this is the life I chose to lead at all those stages in my life. I chose to work, I chose to have friends, I chose to be in the community, and today when I look back and I say that is it, that is my life.
Yeah. I have, this, I have said it so many times, be a mother, not a martyr. And I also very much believe personally, professionally, that a happy woman makes a happy wife, a happy mother, a wonderful friend, So in that sense, I very much admire. You're one of the happiest people that I know. You're such a joy to be around, and we all adore you. And a lot of that is where you tried not to be a martyr. On that note, thank you, Sudha Krishnan, for sharing your insights today. We have covered such powerful ground in understanding the intersection of disability, culture, and family. For our listeners, stay tuned to part two, where we'll focus on the importance of self care and emotional regulation for parents, and we'll have another additional guest speaker join us. And in part three, we'll talk about the self care for teachers working with students with significant disabilities. Thank you for listening. And remember, the journey towards understanding and inclusivity starts with each of us.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.